I selected a chocolate cake for Emily because she loves chocolate. You like chocolate, don't you, Mom? Jennifer asked. If you eat that, you'll die. Despite the warning, Jennifer swiftly switched my cake with Bob's, and I hesitantly took a bite. As we all indulged in our desserts, Bob proudly described how he had reserved the cake a month in advance and praised the delicious crushed nuts on top. Suddenly, he began to choke, his face turning bright red. Bob struggled to breathe, foamed at the mouth, shivered, and then collapsed to the floor. My name is Emily, and I'm 36 years old, working for a food inspection company. I live with my husband, 2 years my senior, and our 7-year-old daughter, Jennifer. I met Bob in a college club, and after dating, we got married. The following year, we welcomed our daughter, Jennifer. She was a late bloomer, starting to walk at the age of 2. Concerned about her delays, we sought medical advice, but all hospitals deemed it individual differences and recommended waiting. Bob, initially worried, grew frustrated with Jennifer's delays in walking and speaking, eventually ignoring her. My mother-in-law, Diane, disliked Jennifer, assuming she had a disability. Only my father-in-law showed affection, finding Jennifer unique and wonderful, making me happy. Bob's behavior worsened, leading to hormonal imbalances and menopause for me. I couldn't have more children. I remember sobbing into my pillow. Bob's harshness continued, with complaints about everything accompanied by loud displays of anger, making me jumpy and apologetic. However, Jennifer remained unaffected, watching his tantrums with a puzzled expression. Jennifer didn't speak much but quickly learned to read and was engrossed in books. By preschool, she read not just picture books but also encyclopedias. As she approached elementary school, they suggested a special education class due to her lack of speech. Bob was furious, storming off, leaving me helpless. Jennifer comforted me, and the next day, Diane called, concerned about the reputation it would bring. Neither Bob nor Diane seemed genuinely concerned about Jennifer. It was about appearances. Consulting with local counselors, school teachers, and municipal officers, it was decided that Jennifer would attend regular classes. I felt that the students, parents, and teachers in the special needs class were wonderful and might be a better fit for Jennifer. Unable to suggest the special education class due to Bob and Diane's evident objections, I found some free time when Jennifer started elementary school. The temp agency I worked for offered me a permanent position that was fulfilling and provided a welcome break from the stifling atmosphere at home. Deciding to discuss the opportunity with Bob, he hesitated when I mentioned the permanent position. With crossed arms, he looked down at me and insisted that I continue taking care of the house as before, or even better. However, he also wanted some help from me. After banging the table, he declared that housework was my responsibility. In response, I suggested asking my mom for help, and after a brief pause, Bob reluctantly agreed. Shockingly, Diane, with whom I always had issues, started coming to our house every other day, as Bob gave her a spare key. During Diane's visits, she consistently made sarcastic remarks about the state of the house and criticized my cleaning habits. Despite my increased efforts to be meticulous with house chores, her complaints persisted for weeks. Eventually, unable to bear the bullying any longer, I told Diane that I could handle the house properly without her visits. Reluctantly, she agreed and stopped coming over. Just when I thought the situation had improved, Bob began spending more time at his parents' house, where he had always loved returning. This increased frequency raised concerns. Later, when Jennifer was in 2nd grade, my father-in-law, the only one who had been kind to Jennifer, suddenly passed away. At the funeral, I noticed Bob and Diane occasionally glancing at each other and laughing. Their apparent lack of sadness struck me as odd, given that I never perceived a close relationship between Diane and my father-in-law. Seeing the main mourner laughing at a funeral felt out of place. With Jennifer losing her only ally after her grandfather's death, I felt a growing sense of unease. Juggling housework, childcare, and a full-time job had taken its toll, and I fell sick with a fever. While Bob continued spending time at his family home, I called him, asking for help with dinner. To my dismay, he flatly refused, citing concerns about catching a cold from me. Bob stated that he would stay at his parents' place for a bit, and he hung up without further discussion. His absence extended to a whole week. As I began to recover and work became busier, news of my potential promotion to section manager brought excitement. However, the joy was tempered by the realization of the additional responsibilities it would entail, especially considering my duties at home. When I spoke to Bob about it, he insisted that I maintain my role in household duties. Moreover, he condescendingly questioned my ability to handle a position like section manager, pointing out that it was the same rank as his. The next day, Diane visited our house, relaying Bob's complaints about the messy state of the house. She promptly began inspecting every aspect, critiquing the way windows were wiped, laundry was folded, and even pointing out water stains in the bathroom. I was forced to redo all of these tasks. During Diane's visits, Jennifer, with a serious expression, started engaging in conversation with her. She asked about the 4 main elements of happiness and inquired if Diane knew about happiness hormones. Jennifer's unexpected questions left Diane puzzled, and she struggled to respond. Jennifer, showcasing her knowledge, listed oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, and endorphins as the neurotransmitters responsible for happiness. Diane, baffled, glanced at me with a concerned expression. Despite Jennifer's detailed explanations about the connection between neurotransmitters, diseases, and sleep-inducing substances, Diane left the house exhausted. Thankfully, I was spared from Diane's nagging that day. On my birthday, Bob returned from a business trip and surprised me with a birthday cake. It was the first time he had ever bought something for me since our marriage. Although he regularly gifted Diane souvenirs and designer items, he had never bought anything for Jennifer or me. I was stunned, trying to comprehend what had gotten into Bob this time. Seeing me in shock, Bob held up the cake box and said, "Thanks for everything. I love you. I'm gonna put this in the fridge. Let's eat it later." Bob's overly sweet tone sent shivers down my spine. Jennifer, seemingly displeased with something, took a bottle of mineral water from the fridge, gave the cake a quick glance, and went to her room. With Jennifer staying in her room, Bob and I proceeded to eat dinner. Throughout the meal, Bob showered me with cringe-worthy compliments, expressing apologies for leaving the housework to me, and pledging to help more in the future. Despite finding his words uncomfortable, I nodded along to avoid upsetting him. After dinner, as I began cleaning up, Bob took out the cake box from the fridge. I was about to set plates and get a knife when Bob gestured for me to sit, saying, "Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it." Bob served the cake and brought it to the table, and honestly, I found his actions a bit creepy. Bob declared, "I got chocolate cake, Emily's favorite. You like chocolate, don't you?" Uncomfortable with the prospect of being alone with him any longer, I decided to fetch Jennifer. "I'll go call Jennifer. Just wait here," I said and hurried to her room. Jennifer was on my old computer, seemingly searching for something. "Mom, you shouldn't eat that cake." "Why?" "What do you mean?" "Just trust me right now," Jennifer urged, looking at me with a desperation I had never seen before. Deciding to trust her, Jennifer took my hand, and we returned to the dining room. "Shall we dig in?" Bob suggested. Jennifer, with a serious tone, replied, "Hey, we don't have any forks. Usually, I'd head to the kitchen right away." Jennifer was gripping my clothes tightly, preventing me from moving. Apologizing, Bob cheerfully rose from the table, stating he would get the forks. In that moment, Jennifer urgently whispered to me, "Mom, if you eat that, you're gonna die." Swiftly, she switched our slices of cake. Bob returned with a fork, proudly eating the cake in front of us. He rambled about the cake being made by a famous pastry chef, mentioning his advance reservation and the delicious crushed nuts on top. As we all took bites, he suddenly began to choke. Bob's face turned red, breathing labored, foaming at the mouth, and then he collapsed onto the floor. It seemed like an anaphylactic shock from an allergy. Both Bob and I had buckwheat allergies, but there was no way the cake we were eating contained any. Frozen in shock, Jennifer calmly spoke to me. "Mom, call 911," handing me her phone. Returning to reality, I called the ambulance. Jennifer turned Bob to his side, instructing me to hit him hard on the back. Following her guidance, Bob spit out the cake, and his breathing eased a little. In the ambulance, he kept murmuring buckwheat, buckwheat. An EMT advised me to sit next to him for comfort, and I followed the instructions. After receiving treatment at the hospital, Bob was out of danger, but he was kept for a few days as a precaution. Wondering how Jennifer foresaw the life-threatening situation, I returned home, completing the hospital admission procedures while pondering the mystery. Jennifer pulled out a wrapper from the trash, showing me, "Dad threw this in the kitchen trash." It was a wrapper from buckwheat cookies. Jennifer explained that the cake box Bob brought home had a sticker half peeled off. She checked the kitchen trash, found an unfamiliar wrapper, and looked it up online. Discovering that the cookies contained buckwheat flour, she warned me about it, ultimately preventing a severe allergic reaction. I pulled out my phone, ready to make a call. "I need to tell the police right away," I declared. "I think you should reconsider." Jennifer's calm voice startled me. "Why?" I asked. Jennifer began to explain, "Dad's the one who collapsed. If you report it, the police might suspect you." A sense of dread clouded my vision. She was right. Going to the police might make me a prime suspect. Overwhelmed with despair, I wondered what to do. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll handle it," Jennifer reassured me. Jennifer went into Bob's study, searching for something. Bob had always forbidden me from entering without permission, and I rarely ventured in. Jennifer rummaged through a drawer and flipped through a notebook, mentioning that Dad had always been meticulous. She stopped and showed me a page from the notebook, revealing a sinister plan. My father-in-law had been a victim in a similar way, and the note detailed how to mix crushed buckwheat cookies into seasoning. Shockingly, Diane was involved in this sinister plan, and at the bottom of the page, it read, "Next, Emily's birthday." I clenched the notebook tightly in my hands. "It's okay, that's why," Jennifer said, her voice strained as she tried to comfort me. In that moment, I realized I was shaking more from anger than fear. After what he did to my father-in-law, he was after my life. I made a vow deep within. I would never forgive Bob and Diane. With determination in my heart, I spoke to Jennifer. "Hey, this notebook, it could be used as evidence, right?" I asked. Jennifer shook her head sadly. "I wish, but probably not. If they claim it's just a figment of their imagination, we've got nothing. And as for Grandpa, there's no way to prove anything now." I hung my head deep in thought. You're right. Without concrete evidence, they can weasel out of it. Jennifer gripped my hand tightly. "I'll find the evidence. I promise I'm gonna protect you. We'll send those two to prison." Encouraged by Jennifer's words, I nodded with determination and squeezed her hand in return. If they want to fight, we'll give them one. For Jennifer and for my own sake, I was resolved to protect my life and avenge my father-in-law. Jennifer and I swore to take revenge on Bob and Diane, and we started preparing for our final confrontation. The first step was to lure them into our house. I asked Diane to tell me Bob's favorite dishes, saying I wanted to cook for him when he got out of the hospital. Without any suspicion, Diane came over, and though I didn't want to be with her for even a second, I held my tongue and learned her recipes in the kitchen. Meanwhile, Jennifer went through Diane's purse and found the buckwheat cookies. Swiftly, Jennifer took just one of them. The next day, I brought the buckwheat cookie to work and requested a composition test. Working in a food inspecting company unexpectedly came in handy at a time like this. A few days later, Bob was discharged from the hospital. I told Diane that I was preparing a special dinner for his discharge and asked her to pick up Bob. While waiting for Bob to come home, Jennifer and I prepared a table filled with Bob's favorite dishes. By the time the dinner preparations were finished, Bob and Diane had returned home. Jennifer went to the front door to greet them, holding Bob's bags and guiding them to the dining table. "Mom and I made today's dishes, taught by Grandma. Bob, pleased, took his seat and began eating. Diane, too, seemed to enjoy her meal. After a while, puzzled expressions formed on their faces. "Hey, Mom, look at that," Bob whispered to Diane, gesturing subtly. "Oh my God," Diane exclaimed, staring at something on the table, her eyes widening in shock. So startled, she even dropped the fried chicken she was holding with her fork, seemingly not noticing. Bob and Diane stopped eating. Trying to lighten the mood, I asked Bob, "Is the seasoning all right? I guess I can't make it quite like your mother did." Both their heads were down, and they responded, "No, it's not that. It's delicious." Beaming a big smile at them, I added, "This seasoning isn't just tasty. It seems to be quite invigorating, too. My father-in-law had told me about it." While Bob and Diane shivered as if cold, I continued to smile, unfazed. I instructed Jennifer to sprinkle some of the seasoning on their food, but Bob vehemently interrupted, demanding Jennifer to stop. Confused, he questioned why they were so spooked. "I just wanted you and your mother to live a long life," I replied with a broad grin. Diane, covering her ears and screaming, pleaded with me to stop. I sarcastically mentioned how they wanted me to be healthy too, which led them to sprinkle butt stuff on the cake, resulting in Bob ending up in the hospital. I handed a set of documents to the shocked duo, explaining that our company's inspector had checked the contents of the cake and the buckwheat cookies, revealing matching ingredients. Confronted with the evidence, Bob and Diane exchanged glances, feigning innocence. "What are you talking about? I have no idea about any of that," they insisted. Diane claimed the cookies were a gift from a friend, but I calmly placed a copy of Bob's notebook on the table. "Then what's this note about ordering cookies online?" I asked. The notebook detailed the manufacturer, product name, shipping date, price, and more. Bob and Diane's faces turned from red to blue. "It also says here that in small amounts, it wouldn't be detected if induced to vomit." I stared intently at Diane. "This is related to my father-in-law's cause of death, isn't it?" Bob, looking defeated, began to speak. "Dad was in our way. Maybe he didn't like that Mom and I were close. He was always butting in and being a nuisance. He constantly lectured Bob and me, saying things like our relationship isn't normal. I couldn't stand it. We mixed those buckwheat cookies into the seasoning and made him eat it. It was merely concerned for an unusually close mother-son relationship that had troubled my father-in-law. Yet Bob and Diane seemed to have taken it personally. Their justifications were incredibly selfish. I couldn't help but pity my father-in-law, who lost his life trying to foster a better family environment. Bob and Diane admitted to using the same method on me, explaining that I had the same buckwheat allergy as them, and that I was in their way. The realization that they committed a crime hit me hard. "I'm going to call the police right now and submit this evidence," I declared, ready to seek justice. Suddenly, Bob stood up, snatched the copied notebook, and forced it into his mouth, swallowing it whole. Diane, Jennifer, and I watched in shock as he destroyed the evidence. "There you go, no more evidence. The police will just think it's some crazy story from Emily, my wife," Bob said with a smug expression. "Dad, that's a copy. The real one is somewhere else," Jennifer calmly stated, revealing her strategic move. She placed a voice recorder on the table, exposing their entire conversation. Jennifer had secretly recorded their admission from the beginning, hidden under the table. "It's over," Bob muttered, collapsing weakly into his chair. Diane, unable to contain her anger, slammed the table, expressing her frustration. "You guys really thought this plan would work, huh?" Jennifer remarked with a hint of disbelief. I pulled out my smartphone, ready to call the police. "Admit your wrongdoing and make amends. It's the least you can do to honor my father-in-law," I asserted. As I began to dial, Bob and Diane suddenly tried to apologize desperately. "Please don't call the cops. We're really sorry. Forgive us." They kept pleading for mercy. Jennifer explained how their plan went wrong, pointing out Bob's mama's boy tendencies and the evident mistakes they made. We decided to spare them further humiliation with Jennifer promising not to get involved with people like them anymore. Later, when the police came to arrest Bob and Diane, they cried and screamed, making the process difficult. The evidence, including the copied notes, voice recording, and purchase history of buckwheat cookies, led to their conviction. After their arrest, the divorce from Bob was finalized, and we proceeded with the division of property. Diane sold her family home to cover legal costs, while Bob used the money from selling his house for child support. Jennifer and I set up a memorial for my father-in-law, paying our respects. Jennifer surprised me with an IQ test result, revealing her gifted intelligence with an IQ of 135. She transferred to a school catering to gifted children, where she happily pursued her interests. Living with just Jennifer has been joyful, my work fulfilling, and life rewarding. Jennifer's hugs, releasing the happy hormone oxytocin, brought us closer. My complexion improved, and even my menstrual cycle returned, perhaps thanks to the mentioned happy hormone. From here on out, I'm determined to live happily with Jennifer,